Today we're talking about the brand new Zhiyun Crane M3 and why it may be the perfect gimbal for the Sigma FP or other mirrorless cameras. But first, if you're new to the channel, my name is Anson, and on this channel we talk about filmmaking, specifically budget gear, tutorials, and behind the scenes look at the projects that I'm working on. So if that's something you're into, consider subscribing. The Zhiyun Crane M3 is a new gimbal from Zhiyun, and I'll be honest, I'm super excited about it. I'm not much of a gimbal person, but it is one gimbal that I am really excited to use. So with that, I do want to thank Zhiyun for sending this over to me to test, but as always, they are not requiring I say anything specifically, and so you get my full and honest opinion. The way that we're going to talk about this gimbal is some of my favorite things about using this gimbal. I wanted to do a pros and cons list, but honestly, I couldn't find a ton of cons, and so we're really just going to talk about what I like about this gimbal and then maybe my overall thoughts and who I might recommend it for. So with that being said, let's get into the things that I like about this gimbal, starting first with the updated base plate for your camera. Now I should say here that I did previously own the Crane M2, and so using the Crane M3, I'm very aware of the differences between the two, and one of the big differences is the improved base plate. With the old Crane M2, I always questioned how secure the camera was on that base plate. It wasn't really the most secure base plate to me, and it was very sloppy in execution in my opinion. I was not a fan of it. Now the Crane M3 has improved on that because two things have been updated with it. One, the thumb screw now has a place for a flathead screwdriver, and so you can even more secure that thumb screw. And on top of that, the way that you attach the base plate to the gimbal is by snapping it in place. With the old Crane M2, you had to slide it on and tighten it up by hand with a screw. This one snaps in place and has a really good locking mechanism, and so you feel really secure about the camera being on the gimbal. And so that's one of the first things that I really enjoyed about the improvement in the Crane M3. So the next thing I like about the Crane M3, and that's an improvement on the Crane M2, is now it does have locking axis. This is something we see on bigger gimbals, and the fact that this gimbal has it is amazing because it is so much easier to balance a camera on a gimbal with locking axis. And so that's something that's really awesome, is the fact that the Crane M3 now has that. Going into the next thing that I like about the Crane M3 with the tilt axis, when you are adjusting and making those micro adjustments, the base plate of the camera actually slides back and forth. Before, with the Crane M2, you basically had to use the thumb screw to move the camera back and forward, and that was such a pain. But that is something that has been changed with the Crane M3, is now you do have a proper sliding option with the camera on its base plate. The next thing I like about the Crane M3 is the fact that the menu screen is a little bit larger and easier to use. Zhiyun touts that you can use the entire gimbal with just one hand, and it's really easy to use, so I actually would believe that. I don't think I did. I don't think I tried, but I would believe that you can use it all with just one hand. But that's something I appreciate about it as well. One thing I want to talk about is how compact it is, but yet still very powerful. So some of the B-roll that you'll see is a shoot that I set up where I basically just had somebody walk around town and I filmed them. But I filmed them with this setup. This is a Sigma FP in its cage with an SSD on top and a cine-modded Leica R 50mm f1.4. This may be a small system, but it's not light at all. It is very cumbersome in weight, and the fact that this gimbal handled this setup is really impressive. And that's also while staying relatively small in size, and so that's just really impressive to me. Now I also use this with the X-T3, and that was just a dream because the X-T3 is a small camera and has small lenses, and so that was really easy to use. But the fact that this works so well with the Sigma FP in this setup was really awesome. Now something I will say is that with the Sigma FP, I did use a counterweight, and because the SSD was on top, I couldn't go super low when I was shooting. But overall, if you're looking at something where you just want a good steady fluid shot and you're not going to do like a low-hanging shot or something like that, this will absolutely work with your Sigma FP. And so what that says for me is if you're a professional and you have a smaller setup, maybe an FX3 or a Sony a7S III with maybe a prime lens or a smaller zoom lens, you can absolutely get away using this gimbal instead of necessarily feeling like you have to go and rig out your whole kit, which some people do prefer handheld, which is fine. But overall, if you do want to be a little bit more minimal, you can absolutely strip everything down and use this gimbal and get some really awesome shots. for your professional shoots. There's two more smaller things I want to mention that I like about the gimbal. One is the overall style. I love this white look. It's very much like that stormtrooper look that everybody's doing right now. And if you go with the combo package, which is what I have, you actually get a white carrying case, a white bag, which is really cool. And so that's something that I appreciate. It's just the overall style of it. And then the last thing I'll mention that I like about the gimbal is the price. This is a $369 gimbal to start out. Now, you don't get the white bag with the $369 option. I think you have to pay the $450 option to get the white bag. And then there's a pro pack that has a microphone and things like that. But honestly, this is more than enough for that $449. Or if you don't want the bag, you can get the $369 option. And so overall, the fact that you get this gimbal that does all the things that it does and is super compact and really powerful at this price range is really impressive. Now, I didn't mention this because I didn't really use it, but I do appreciate the fact that it does have the light on the gimbal. Now, I don't really use onboard lighting with a camera, and so I didn't use this feature, so I can't really speak to it, but I do appreciate that it's there if you're doing a late night interview or a low light interview, something like that, and you need the extra light, you do have that option. And I will say, I turned it on once, it's really bright, so that's really cool, and it is bicolor, so that's something you want to keep in mind. So with that, let's talk about my overall thoughts and who I might recommend this to. And I think I have like 2 minutes on my card, so we're gonna make this fast. My overall thoughts on this gimbal is just, I don't have any negatives. This gimbal is amazing. Now, if you have a larger camera, like I have the 6K and 6K Pro, I obviously didn't use those cameras on this gimbal, so that could be kind of a downside, is that it is really for smaller setups. But overall, for what it is, honestly, I really like smaller setups. I really like being as nimble as possible when I'm shooting, and so the fact that this gimbal will let me stay as nimble as possible with a smaller camera and lens is really awesome, and it does perform really well, especially with something like the Sigma FP, which I should say, I didn't actually get the Sigma FP to balance without the motors being on, and it still handled it like a beast, even though it wasn't fully balanced the way that it should be when you go to balance a gimbal. And so the people I'd recommend this for are anybody, whether you're a professional or just a hobbyist, that have a smaller camera and lens package, that just want some smooth gimbal shots, but don't want to carry around a huge gimbal. And so if that's you, if you are a professional or just a hobbyist that need that small, lightweight package, but ultimately performs, I would definitely check out the Zhiyun Crane M3. And so that's it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did enjoy the video, make sure to give it a like. And if you're digging the overall content from the channel, consider subscribing. If you do have any more questions about this gimbal, let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you for joining. Go and find your journey. Go embrace life. Stay safe, be happy, support each other. Peace.